silly season seems to be fast among us here, from Formula One, really right down through IndyCar and other series as well. We recently heard that Alonso, kind of a shock announcement after having been so fast and impressive with the Alpine team, replacing a retiring Sebastian Vettel, which is huge news in and of itself. But that's created a huge contract sort of snafu with a young driver who's coming up through the ranks, who's looking very, very favored, but claiming that a couple of teams are making their own claims without his approval.
Yeah, it's been a wild ride the last couple of weeks, right? So first of all, Sebastian making his announcement he's going to retire.
I hereby announce my retirement from Formula One by the end of the 2022 season. Probably I should start with a long list of people to thank now, but I feel it is more important to explain the reasons behind my decision. I love this sport. It has been central to my life since I can remember. But as much as there's life on track, there's my life off track too. Being a racing driver has never been my sole identity. I very much believe in identity by who we are and how we treat others, rather than what we do. Who am I? I'm Sebastian, father of 3 children and husband to a wonderful woman. I am curious and easily fascinated by passionate or skilled people. I am obsessed with perfection. I am tolerant and feel we all have the same rights to live, no matter what we look like, where we come from, and who we love.
Wonderful ambassador for the sport, great guy, just great heritage in Formula One. And that opened up a key seat with Aston Martin Racing, with their plans, with Lawrence Stroll on board, with the revenue and resources that he brings to the table, a prime Formula One seat with the team that's on the rise. So Fernando Alonso, I mean, he's so good, Greg, even at his age. He still has that sharpness, that grit, that determination to run at the front of the pack. And suddenly he made a surprise announcement. Everyone was just deciding or determining whether he was going to retire or stay with Alpine. He jumped ship immediately. And suddenly, for Alpine's perspective, they think, well, that's okay. We've got this wonderful young rookie in Oscar. He can just fill his seat. They make the announcement, and Oscar says, not so fast.
Yeah, I mean, he literally put out his own statement saying that was done without my approval. I have not signed with them. And that's really sort of thrown things up in the air just a little bit. And talk about how that mirrors what's been going on with Alex Palou on this side of the pond.
Oh, it's almost identical, Greg. It's almost cut and paste. Make an announcement, and then suddenly the driver goes on social media saying, and then suddenly we haven't seen the third part of that in terms of a team making the announcement for who Oscar may or may not be driving for next year.
IndyCar's reigning series champion plans to switch teams next season, even denouncing in a news release from his current team. Alex Palou says he's driving for McLaren next year. Palou made the announcement on Twitter yesterday after Chip Ganassi Racing said he was staying. Palou says Ganassi Racing's tweet was posted without his permission. He says he is leaving the team for personal issues. However, News 8 reached out to Chip Ganassi Racing yesterday, and it says Palou will still race for them next year. Palou gave Ganassi its 14th series crown last season. He's posted 4 top 5 finishes so far this year, although he has not won any races.
It really comes down to these bright young talents. They're so important now in terms of the Formula One teams getting the right guy for the seat, having that extra edge like Lando Norris has, for example, with McLaren, getting that little edge in performance. They can make the difference in terms of whether you're running midfield or right up front. So they certainly see it in Piastri in terms of his performance in Formula 2. He's been knocking on the door. He's been looking for this opportunity. Alpine, Otmar Alpine says, we've done everything that we've said in our agreement. We're giving him the R&D time, the sim time, the practice time. He is there to fill that seat should it become available. It's available, and we're pushing him in. So they believe they have the option. Meanwhile, his management team, including Mark Webber, is saying, no, we're in kind of a negotiation with other teams. We're going to pick the best choice. So again, it comes down to the piece of paper and how you read it and how it's been worded. But very critical for these young drivers, and the same with Alex Palou, with Chip Ganassi Racing, the McLaren team. That is a wild one as well right now.
What are the odds that's a negotiating ploy to try and drive their value up just a little bit when they start talking bucks?
I think it can be to a certain point, but when you get to making public statements and then another team, in the case of Palou, saying we have signed him for next year, that's taken it to a whole new level. So if we kind of detail the Palou situation a little bit, Greg, going back a couple of years, he drove for Dale Coyne in IndyCar, showed great promise. Chip has always been great at really recognizing emerging young talent and trying to get him on his team. He made the agreement, got Alex on board. It was obviously a 2+ in terms of 2+1 or 2+ an option. And Chip said that he was negotiating with Alex. And from Alex's perspective, I'm sure Chip got him for a song 2 years ago, and now he's a champion. So he wants to be rewarded. And with the IndyCar driver market too, there's a lot more revenue being driven down that road. So the driver salaries in the last 12 months are really starting to escalate. So from Alex's perspective, he may have been tied to a price point in his contract that he was no longer happy with. And the only thing that I can think could have happened, and I find it hard to believe that Chip, with his experience and his attorneys, would have let that option go through a time lapse there in terms of they're talking to him, believe they're in negotiation, have indicated to him, but maybe they didn't do it formally with a letter saying we're taking up the option. So I don't understand how Alex Palou's management team feel they can just walk away and sign with another team unless they truly believe they have an out.
The very awkward public split in IndyCar is now playing out in court. Chip Ganassi Racing has filed a lawsuit against its own driver, Alex Palou. He's the reigning series champ, and he's announced he's leaving for McLaren next year. Maybe. According to online court records, Ganassi filed a lawsuit Monday. The filing includes as evidence to tweets from Palou and McLaren and McLaren's announcement about the switch. The feud, as we reported here on Daybreak, went public when Ganassi Racing tweeted an announcement that Palou was staying with the team for 23 and included a quote from Palou. Palou quickly tweeted in response that he's not staying. Ganassi's tweet was wrong and that he never said the quote attributed to him. Palou and McLaren announced their deal for 2023 soon after. The online records indicate that Palou and McLaren have been subpoenaed. No date yet for a hearing on the suit.
Chip Ganassi Racing just sent News 8 a statement within the last few minutes. It reads, Alex Palou is under contract with Chip Ganassi Racing through the end of the 2023 season. He is a valued member of our team, and we will continue to support him in chasing wins, podiums, and IndyCar championships. As the result of a competing racing team improperly attempting to contract with him, notwithstanding the clear terms of our contract, we are proceeding to legal process pursuant to the contract.
Well, it's going to be incredibly interesting to see how that plays out, as well as with the Oscar Piastri scenario in Formula One. Now, a little bit different, but a similar scenario has affected some teams in IMSA, primarily, though, it seems because of the onset of the GTP program and some major factory involvement there. And some of the drivers, and I think Pippo Durrani is probably the one who's been most affected, with Philippe Nasr being pinched and taken to the new GTP program. Dane Cameron, another one who's moved from his team. A lot of shuffling in the driver department going on in IMSA with that new GTP program coming up.
Well, last year, with all of these big factories suddenly make their announcements that they're going LMDH, the Penske Porsche announcement, suddenly they had to get a lot of drivers, Greg. They're filling 4 cars for next year. So they went out and looked at the landscape and seeing who do we want. Well, obviously, Felipe Nasr is one of the top-notch prototype drivers coming off a couple of championships, including winning last year's championship with Pippo Durrani in the Whelen Engineering car. So he was available contractually. They went and got him. Dane Cameron's situation was a little bit more difficult. He'd driven for Roger before with the Acura Team Penske for 3 seasons, and then he was with Meyer Shank with the Acura affiliation. So I think that was a lot more complicated in making Dane available, but they worked it out, and Dane's now on board. But how it relates to Pippo Durrani, he suddenly shows up this year to defend a championship with a brand new teammate in Tristan Nunez. Now, Tristan has shown great promise over the last few seasons with the Mazda Motorsports team, but I felt it was a little outside the box, even though I'd seen some tremendous performances from Tristan, and they threw him in that seat. And it's such a pressure cooker, Greg, and the level is so high right now. These driver combinations are top notch. And if you're just a few tenths off, you're giving up something. You've got to compromise there. And the team made a mid-season decision to let Tristan move aside and bring in Olivier Pla, who's got a lot more experience. But that's not been easy either. They haven't got the results they thought they'd get by putting in an experienced pro like Pla in the seat. So Durrani's on the sidelines saying, just give me a teammate like I had last year. But that is hard to find. And that's why these top-notch drivers, why they're kind of getting poached or they're getting driven to a new contract pretty early.
it does talk a little bit, doesn't it, about how important consistency is within a team, because you'd think, you replace a very talented driver in Tristan with a arguably maybe even more talented or certainly more experienced driver with a Pla, and you would think, okay, boom, everything's going to be fine, but not so much. There is that consistency and that dynamic within a team that can be really affected negatively with mid-season changes.
Chemistry is huge in general within a squad, between the team, the driver. When you have sports car racing, it's so unique, Greg. You're sharing the same car. You're sharing the same seat, albeit with an insert and stuff. You're driving the same car. You got to like the same car. You got to like how it feels on the brake, how it puts the power down. What are you looking for? What are the pros and cons in the setup? So to get that match that Durrani and Nasser had is hard to achieve. So they've had Nunez in the car. They got Pla in the car. Pla is great at high commitment racetracks that we've been at in terms of at CTMP, this weekend at Road America, certainly. But it's still tough to find that match. And then the same thing in Formula One. You look at Lando Norris, Danny Ricciardo. They're not performing at the same level because the car suits one driver and is not suiting the other. So that chemistry and that fit is so critical to get the ultimate success.
And then, of course, I think you have to worry about, if you're a Pippo Durrani, okay, do I stay with this team? Do I look for something else? So there can be a real domino effect there. And, that was, there's another aspect of this, that one of the things that you see in sports car racing that isn't really as apparent in Formula One or even IndyCar racing is longevity by a driver with a serious program to be able to build their star status, to build that sort of hero thing. And to me, almost, you look at IMSA and his predecessor ALMS. I mean, the last big star that I think people would really consider as one of the hero drivers was a guy named Alan McNish. That was a long time ago.
Yeah, it was. And, just that loyalty, we talked about it with Scott Dixon in terms of him matching Mario's record recently. He's been with Chip Ganassi Racing for 20 years. So if you find a great fit, you don't want to move from that. I think Action Express Racing and the Whelen Engineering number 31 is a great fit for Pippo Durrani. But the missing piece of the puzzle right now is finding that teammate who just clicks with him, likes the same setup, because they'll be off and running, they'll be winning races once again, and be a threat for the championship next year if they can find that vital ingredient moving forward.
And let's think about next year quickly. A GTP, and this is purely a speculative exercise here with your opinion. But at this stage now, all of the manufacturers, save Lamborghini, which is going to be, I believe, 2024, all the other ones have now been on track. They've even, some of them, tested together, particularly the hybrid system that is spec for all of them. Any ideas, any thoughts on your point about who might be up there just a little bit in terms of ahead of the curve?
Well, if you look at when they first put cars on racetrack, you'd think Porsche and Team Penske have a huge advantage. But I bumped into Tim Cindric, who's president of Penske Racing, of course, at the weekend. I said, how's it been going? He said, well, we've had a few technical issues with the MGU, so we haven't got the track time that we envisioned. And now they've gone in this collaboration mode because we can't afford to show up at the first big race next year, the Rolex 24 at Daytona, and have everyone having a problem with the same piece of kit. Because this piece of kit is across the board. Everyone is using the same hybrid system. So it's important that everyone gets more miles on that hybrid system so that it's truly proven and reliable come January of next year. So they thought they would have a big leg up by having about a 6-month lead time in terms of their track testing over Cadillac, Acura, and ultimately BMW are the last to hit the road here in the last couple of weeks. So that has not played out. So I think it's going to be pretty even, Greg. And but they're hitting it hard right now. All of these teams are pushing really hard. Cadillac, we're down with Porsche at Sebring. Acura with Wayne Taylor Racing were in Europe at Paul Ricard for a few days, and since then been at Kansas Speedway. Unlikely scenario if we're doing some testing. We're just trying to mimic what they're going to see at Daytona, and they're really pounding the road now, getting that mileage put on the board.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting. And if you're just thinking about just the aesthetics of the GTP category, every one of those cars is stunning, and I can't wait to see them on track. Last thing about GTP, and this is going to sort of reference the other classes, GT Daytona, LMP2, those categories, with the potential star power using the GTP name and what's happening here. Are some of these other classes, do you think, going to be scrambling for some of that media and marketing pie?
I think it's always difficult as being part of the broadcast team. You and I have been down this road many times before. It's kind of moving the coverage around so that you actually share the profile and the exposure to all of the classes. And as I said, IMSA has 18 manufacturers across their profile there, so they want to certainly tick everyone's box in terms of giving them the exposure and the return on the investment. So it's a challenge, Greg. You know that the spotlight is going to be firmly on LMDH cars in the GTP class at the Royal X24 in the early season rounds. But I think we're going to see such spectacular racing through all of the classes once again. It's hard to turn a blind eye to it, so it naturally drives the cameras to the action that we saw. Who can forget that last lap battle in GTD Pro at the Royal X24 with the two Porsches going hard at it? We're not going to ignore that, trust me. So I'm sure they'll get their fair share of time.